Greetings. Welcome back to Revival Now. So good that you could be with us today. And as I said in the last session, uh, I'm talking about prayer and talking about getting ready and understanding the power of prayer. And in Psalm 77, uh, I went back to that this morning in my devotional time. And again, the Lord began to show me some things that I hadn't seen before. So go with me, will you, to Psalm 77. It's a musical psalm that Asaph had written, and it's all about worship. But it's a cry. It's a cry out from Asaph, who's crying out in his need, and it's a song that they sang. But it's so powerful in talking about how we see God in troubled times. Now let's look at it. The first few verses. I cried out to God for help. I cried out to God to hear me. When I was in distress, I sought the Lord. At night, I stretched out untiring hands and would not be comforted. Here, the psalmist is saying, I'm crying out to God in my need for help. I cried out for him to hear me. In my distress, I sought the Lord. And look at this expression here. At night, I stretched out untiring hands. That means he prayed without ceasing. That's a Mideast term, stretched out untiring hands. But then he said, I would not be comforted. How many of us, in the middle of our stress, in the middle of our struggles, in the middle of our pain, we cry out to the Lord, but sometimes that pain becomes so difficult and overwhelming that nothing can comfort us. The psalmist said, I would not be comforted. In other words, in his crying out, in his praying, in his discussing and talking in anguish, there was nothing that could comfort him at that moment. And then in verse 3, he says, but I remembered you, God, and I groaned. That means deep inside. The anguish is great and heavy. I meditated, and my spirit grew faint. You kept my eyes from closing. I was too troubled to speak. I thought about the former days, the years long ago. I remember my songs in the night. My heart meditated, and my spirit asked, will the Lord reject forever? Will he never show his favor again? Has his unfailing love vanished forever? Has his promise failed for all time? Has God forgotten to be merciful? Has he in anger withheld his compassion? What's happening here? In the midst of his trial, in the midst of his pain, in the midst of his struggles, he's overwhelmed, and he's saying, has the Lord forgotten me? Will he ever show up again? Can I get through this? How many of us have gone through that? How many of us felt like that? How many of us have struggled in our own areas of pain that has been so deep for many of us that we thought, Lord, have you forgotten me? Lord, are you hearing me? Are you listening to my cry? Lord, do you still love me? Lord, your promises, they don't seem to be hitting me. Are they failing me? And then the psalmist cries out, to this I will appeal. The years when the Most High stretched out his right hand, I will remember the deeds of the Lord. I will remember your miracles long ago. I will consider all your works and meditate on your mighty deeds. Your ways, God, are holy. What God is as great as our God? You're the God who performs miracles. You display your powers among the people. With your mighty arm, you redeemed your people, the descendants of Jacob and Joseph. And so he goes on to talk about, even in the last few verses, how the Red Sea was parted. What is the psalmist saying here? In the middle of his strife, in the middle of his pain, in the middle of his struggle, in the middle of his anguish, when it was overwhelming for him, when he couldn't speak and he couldn't be comforted, he began to remember how good God has been. He began to focus on the goodness of God. My friend, when you and I focus on the goodness of God in the midst of our struggles, then God's goodness becomes focused and not the struggle. And his goodness will lift us out of that mess, lift us out of that pain, give to us what our heart really desires, but at the moment doesn't receive. And so we need to focus on that. So the psalmist switches from that which he couldn't get comfort from and all the questions he had. And that's why I love this psalm, because the psalmist really questions God. And you and I do the same thing. We do. We say, God, where are you? Why didn't you show up? This is heavy for me. And so there are moments when that happens in our life. And the psalmist goes through the same thing. And then he understands. He said, no, no, no. I will appeal this. What? Appealing what? Those thoughts. I'm not going to give into those thoughts because I understand that the Most High has stretched out his hand for me. I'm remembering his good deeds and the wonderful miracles he gave to me and to our people. The psalmist went back and he focused. He shifted his focus from the trouble he was in. Now, this is so apropos for you and I today. We live in a world that's full of, the pandemic, the vaccinated against the unvaccinated, the mask against the unmasked. I mean, it's divided right down the middle. We live, right now, as I'm speaking to you, my daughter has coronavirus. My grandson, 17-year-old, has coronavirus. They got COVID, and they're upstairs in their house. We're in our apartment below. And so we can't get up there to see them because they are in quarantine. And it's very painful for them. They're going through a really difficult time. And so in the midst of this struggle, especially my grandson, he could say, why me? I'm so young. Why do I have to suffer like this? Then he has to go back and remember how good God has been to him and faithful. My daughter, the same. How good is God is faithful. And all of us know what's happening around the world. Afghanistan, tragic, terrible. Many of our believers over there have been persecuted. I just got a text, I can't say from who or where, but in that text, it was actually a brother who was listening, who was talking with a group of Afghanistan believers who were actually praying and worshiping God. And they were talking to this brother who was taping it and sent it to me, the text. And he said that while he was praying with them, while they were singing and worshiping, in the middle of that prayer and worship, he could hear a group of terrorists the Taliban enter into that home. And he heard shots and screams, and then it went dead. What happened? Those believers were all killed. They were all martyred. And in the middle of their prayer, this happened. So some of us can say, well, why did God allow that? We're just passing through. This is not our home. Can you imagine 1 second they were praying, and then they heard the shouts and the yelling of the Taliban come in, and they were killed. And the next moment they opened their eyes in the presence of Jesus. How powerful is that? How powerful is that? But many, many, many of our believing friends who we have ministered to throughout the world are suffering today. And so Psalm 77 is a psalm for them as they remember how good God has been. And now even in their trial, even in their stress, God's goodness will come back. And if he doesn't take them out of the mess, he will take them through it and into his presence. That's the greatest of all things. So I want to encourage all of us today as we go through our own journey, and whatever that may be, whatever struggle that may be, focus on the goodness of God, and he'll take you through. And it'll be a powerful day for you as you do that. God bless you. Thank you for being with us.